of Clinical Chemistry is that, sorry about that. There was an interruption on my screen here while I'm back. So as I was saying, the Africa Federation of Clinical Chemistry has roughly 10 members, but internationally and globally, the International Federation of Clinical Chemistry has more than 95 member countries. So we are a very, very big organization, and our main aim is to advance lab medicine across the globe. In fact, just last in April, we celebrated the Lab Professionals Week, in which we tried to share what the achievements of lab professionals in the health landscape have been over the last, you may say, a decade or 2 decades. So the Africa Federation is supporting a lot of training and teaching, and as well as making our members aware that quality is critical to ensuring that lab results are of the highest standard. And this is the reason why we have initiated a series of webinars. And this particular one is the fourth webinar that is being given. So I hope you are all going to gain from these series of webinars. I'm sure some of you have attended the previous ones, and I welcome all of you to the present one, which is talking on logistics. And as you know, logistics are key to ensuring that that the whole testing process, the lab testing process, is carried out in the best manner and with the best quality as well. So over to you, Dr. Machingora.
Thank you very much, Prof. Erasmus. We now start the program. Our first talk is on asset management and maintenance in the laboratory environment. It's being given by Steve Mlenga, who is from Malawi. He is the laboratory supervisor and return of results coordinator at ICAP Malawi and SLMTA trainer. And we are honored to have him talk on asset management and maintenance in the laboratory environment. Over to you, Steve Mulenga. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. As is mentioned, my name is Stephen Mlenga. I'm from Malawi. I'm a SLAMTA trainer. SLAMTA stands for Strengthening Medical Laboratory Technologist for accreditation. The topic I'm given is talking about asset management, but if you look at my presentation, is titled Equipment Management. Maybe I should say good morning, everyone. Maybe good afternoon to others. Welcome to this talk. I've titled my presentation Equipment Management because when I hear asset management in the lab, what comes in mind first is equipment. So I'm restricting my talk to equipment because that's what it means for me to say asset management. So I'll just talk through selection. Of course, I'll talk in passing because I'm aware the next presenter might talk about acquisition in detail. So I'll talk about selection, installation, equipment verification, and then ongoing lab maintenance. All right, so I'll just go straight into my presentation. I can't go to the next slide. All right, so I'll present this flow diagram as a life cycle of an equipment. before an equipment comes in the laboratory, and then to the very end when an equipment is decommissioned. So at the very beginning, the laboratory identifies the need for an equipment. So the lab will say, all right, we're adding to the test menu. Let's say, for instance, we want to start doing chemistry test. Then the laboratory identifies the need for an equipment. We need to be running chemistry test, so we might need a chemistry equipment. From identifying the need, the laboratory sets up a criteria to have an equipment. What do you want this equipment to be doing, and where can we acquire this equipment? From there, the lab then identifies who can supply this equipment. I think the next presentation will talk about tender how to go about it. So I'll just mention it in passing, but I think the next presenter will talk more in details about purchasing equipment. And then the lab then approves, and then the lab then selects suppliers, goes through the process of approving suppliers. From then, the equipment is purchased and then it's received at the laboratory. So when the equipment is received, it goes through installation. After installation, the lab adds the equipment to the inventory list. Others call it a master list. So you add the equipment to the master list, and then you've added the equipment to the master list. The lab is expected to validate or verify the equipment. So in verification or validation, the lab conducts experiments to check the manufacturer's claim. I think we'll talk about it as we go by. After the equipment is verified or validated, then the laboratory now will develop a program how to implement, how to run the equipment. So in this equipment program, the lab is expected to have now things like SOPs, maintenance, the calibration programs. After all this is set, then the equipment is now ready to run patient samples. Now, when the equipment is ready to run patient samples, that's where now we expected to run a program on equipment management. In equipment management, this is where you talk about equipment maintenance, how you do routine service maintenances. Do you have suppliers? Do you have contractors who will be doing equipment service maintenances? How about calibration program? How often do you calibrate the equipment? How often do you run your controls? And then you run a program, how often the equipment can be checked by a manufacturer. And then there'll be a time the equipment will be obsolete. Then the lab will be expected to decommission the equipment and then finally dispose it. And then when there's need for another equipment, the laboratory goes through the same cycle. I think this is at the heart of this presentation. In the next slide, we'll just go through step by step what this chart is all about. So I think if you don't get anything from this presentation, at least always remember this chart. All right. Okay, so before any equipment is introduced in the system, before you start testing, before you start using the equipment, like number one, the laboratory need to specify the required quality performance for the assay, and then select an assay whose manufacturer claims meet the required performance. So you're saying we want an equipment that will perform these tests, and then you check which equipment can conduct the test that you're looking for. And then before that, before the equipment before you can start running patient samples, the laboratory will need to verify or validate the equipment against the manufacturer's claims. If these are successful, then the lab can start using the equipment. Okay, so what are the things that the lab should consider when trying to purchase or acquiring an equipment? Number one, the laboratory can look at application characteristics. So when you look at an equipment, the questions the lab should be asking is, what are the skills required? Can we have local training within? Is it sophisticated? We need extra training. So what are the skills required? We have them within the laboratory. Number two, the volume of sample. Or if you're a hospital that lands, for example, 200 samples in a day, which equipment would you acquire to meet your demand? What type of sample would you need to be running? Throughput, how much results per specific time do you want this your equipment to be running? And then the size, you think of size because you want to think of where the equipment will be. What are the infrastructure needs? Does it need other auxiliary equipments? Does it need a bigger space? So what are the costs? Can you afford this equipment? Also think of safety and waste disposal. These are application characteristics that the lab will need to think about. But also you need to think about performance characteristics. So if you're purchasing a new equipment or a new method is being introduced, a manufacturer will have recorded on the equipment what the equipment can do. So you look at the manufacturer's claim on reportable range, or this method on precision, accuracy, biasness. All these are your demand. Is equipment giving you what you want? So all these, before setting up and settling for an equipment, the lab manager, the laboratory should have an overview of what the equipment will deliver. Because when you're running verification and validation, also, these are the same experiments that the lab will validate. So when you're running validation, the lab will look at the precision, will look at the accuracy, will look at the trueness and bias, will look at interference, difference intervals. So when coming up with a program to acquire an equipment, these are the things that the lab is expected to look at. Okay, one other aspect that the lab will need to think about, I talked about environment and size, but also where will the equipment be? So when deciding where to place a new equipment, you consider location of utilities. For instance, if you're purchasing a centrifuge and then you're in a lab that's sharing this, you have equipment that will share a centrifuge, you might think to put it central where everyone has access to the centrifuge, for example. So do you also think, do you have sufficient space? Does it need to be close to other equipment? So for example, centrifuge, because it's vibrating, maybe it does not need to be closer to other analytical equipment. So when locating an equipment, you think about all those processes. I hope I'm audible enough and everyone is following. I hope I'm not too fast as well, just to get feedback from everyone. But otherwise, I will continue. Okay, so when finally an equipment is received in the laboratory, you don't want to rush into installing and doing things that as laboratorians are not trained for. So when an equipment arrives at the lab, you want your engineer or manufacturer to store this equipment for you. So do not rush to unpack the items. Let the service engineer unpack and set up the method. For smaller equipment, follow all manufacturers' instructions. So when equipment comes in the lab, you're expecting that the manufacturer is the one to install it. Okay, so like I mentioned, the manufacturer representative installs equipment. So the laboratory, in accordance with manufacturer's instructions. In this case, you're looking at installation qualification. So there should be documentable evidence that the equipment is ready, safe, and meets all installation requirements. So all equipment components have arrived. Check that all equipment components have arrived. Check that equipment is placed and is stored at the intended location. All equipment requirements are met. and all additional assemblies is performed. So before the manufacturer leaves, just check that the equipment is working and in order. So there should be evidence that the equipment can start up, all the functionality checks are confirmed, initial calibration is performed, and data transfer across interfaces. Like I mentioned before an installation engineer leaves, there should be evidence that the equipment is working. Don't leave it to the next day before you know that the equipment is working. So you in good lab practice, basically, the lab and the engineer signs off that the equipment is ready and working. So after you've checked that the equipment is ready, you want to add your equipment to your inventory in the laboratory. So in good lab practice, every lab maintains an inventory of the equipment. Others will call it a master list. So each piece of equipment is uniquely identified. For example, if you have one centrifuge, in this case, we're calling it centrifuge 1. You have details like is centrifuge XYZ, manufacturer model, and serial number. So in your master list, you keep the equipment name, the model number, the serial number, and also the laboratory unique number. So if you're numbering equipment in your lab, let's say chemistry equipment, you say this analyzer is Chem 1. That's your unique identifier, and you put equipment name, the model, and serial number. Yeah, so that's just a picture showing lab equipment and how they should be maintained. Okay, so for new equipment, the lab will need now to implement an equipment program. So an equipment program will be guided by several documents. One of the documents that the lab will now start coming up with is developing SOPs. So these are standard operating procedures. The source of SOPs is usually manuals, manufacturer manuals. So the SOP would detect how to operate a machine. So it's a step-by-step method how to operate the machine. So the lab should keep in its files or SOPs. So SOPs will include how to operate it, how to maintain it, calibrations, and QCs. So SOPs will come with them forms and logs. You collect when you have an equipment, you'll be collecting data. This data will calibration, for instance, calibration data, you need to record it. Maintenance data, you need to record it. That's one. Number two, the quality control programs. How often will you run QCs? Will you enroll in an external an external quality assurance program? Number three, you develop a preventive action schedule. So this will include maintenance and calibration service. Ensure these records are reviewed. You with an equipment, you realize that the lab generates and develops a lot of records. So these records are not just to be kept, but they need to be reviewed so that you see how your equipment is performing. So you review your calibration records, you review your QC records. Also, you need to develop a training procedure. Training procedure will help the laboratory, will help the lab that everyone who's operating an equipment is trained. So in this case, before anyone operates on an equipment, on a new equipment, you make sure that they're trained and they're qualified to perform tests on such an equipment. So you have a training program developed. After developing a training program, you also develop your competence assessments. After you train people, you do competence assessments on them. After they've passed competence assessments, then they can be allowed to run on your to run the equipment. I mentioned about update your inventory management and always review your sample road. Okay, so why equipment management? Why should you have SOPs? Why should you have training programs? Why should you have competence assessments? Why should you keep your why should you have trained personnel on your equipment? Number one, the advantage with having a proper equipment management program is that number one, you increase performance. For instance, only trained personnel is allowed to work on your equipment. Then you because of that, there's increased performance. If you're running your maintenance, your calibration, you reduce service interruption. There's consistency of test results. All your people running on it are competent. You reduce scheduled repairs. You save money in a way. You increase the lifespan of the equipment. And at the back of it all, because in the lab we're serving customers, which are our patients, there's greater customer satisfaction. So I'll just now go through some documents that the lab should maintain if they are to run a proper equipment policy, if they're to run proper equipment maintenance, if they're to run if they're to run a proper equipment program. So this is according to good lab practice. In good lab practice, we say, in good lab practice talks about records. So there's a common saying in the lab that what is not recorded is not done. So number one of the records that the lab will have to keep is an equipment inventory sheet. I'll show you an example of an equipment inventory sheet. An equipment inventory sheet, when equipment is in the lab, some labs maintain a file they call a book of life. I'll talk about a book of life in the next slide. So this is like the first page on the book of life. So on this book of life, you have this inventory sheet that will say what's the equipment name, what's the name of an equipment, who are the manufacturers, who are offering support, your service support. What's the model and serial of the equipment? Where is it in the lab? What's the unique identifier? When was it purchased, in what condition? And when was it received? When was it installed? And was equipment validated? And then when was it placed into use? And if it's decommissioned, when was it decommissioned? So this helps you if let's say the equipment is faulty, someone can just line into your file and check who to contact when the equipment is faulty, for instance. Yeah, so this is an example of an equipment with proper labels. You have here unique identifiers, and also you have a sticker for your service engineer. So it's easy to contact your service engineer. Yeah, like I mentioned, one of the things that we keep on the equipment is the book of life. So the book of life will have everything, every record, every document about an equipment. So there will be files like service contract information. The lab should know what's in the service contract. They should know what to expect from their service engineer. They should know at what point to call them, at what point they'll visit them. The lab should have all this information handy. In the book of life, you keep vendors installation records, laboratory validation records, calibration maintenance, manufacturing notification inserts. In short, every record about equipment, you keep it in a book of life. And then depending on the service on the service contract, you might have to have some toolkits, some small parts that the lab can change. For instance, on a microscope, we have a bulb. So if the right bulb is 40, maybe a lab tech can change. But then in some instances, in some service contract, the laboratory is not allowed to change parts. Then the toolkits can be kept so that as service engineers come in, the toolkits are handled within the laboratory. Okay, and another different document that the lab will keep are operators manual. Operators, why should we keep operators manual? This is where we get information about how to run the machine. So it's a source for SOPs. It's a source for you can get preventive maintenance procedures and schedules. Or you can get maintenance logs, step-by-step instructions. These are SOPs, and then it also explains error codes and alerts. And then the lab should have also standard operating procedures, which are current, easily accessible at the workbench, available for all tests performed, customized to reflect such specific instructions, should provide step-by-step instructions, including how to properly complete the forms, e.g. BRAC template, to collect recapture data, information, or results as specified by laboratory management. So the goodness with a standard operating procedure is that it's customized. So you're getting it from manual, you customize it according to how you want, according to how the laboratory lands equipment. And then this equipment, you'll be using reagents on it. So you want to have reagent logs handy on your workbench. This is where you're registering the reagents which are on board. So you capture things like which reagent is in use, what's the expiry date, what's the onboard expiry date. And then also you should have the lab should maintain a file for calibration. How every time you run a calibration, you record it and also file it. And also finally, the decommission records. So the purpose is you register the self-disposal of equipment in accordance with regulation. So decommission date will include date of decommission, date of decontamination, removal date of all electronic confidential information, and this also should be archived in the book of life that we mentioned. So they and forms. These are many forms that the equipment we use: the QC forms, calibration forms, and all the records that the lab will keep. Okay, I think I have 2 minutes. I should be winding up. So after keeping all the records, this is data that the lab is generating. Because we're generating data, the laboratory should use it to improve. For instance, if you're doing maintenance daily, at the end of the month, the laboratory supervisor or anyone should sit down and then review all the documents that you have. So you review documents like QC logs, you review documents like maintenance logs, and then you get feedback on how your equipment program is running each time you're reviewing the documents. So just comment on review. You put the date the review was done, how many times, staff identification, which results were obtained, conclusions and interpretations. On conclusions and interpretations, this is when I'm getting feedback of that, all right, our equipment is failing frequently. How many times are we doing maintenance? So you get feedback on those. How many times do you have a service in here? Look at our equipment. So the data we're generating in the lab should help us improve our services. I think this is where I end my presentation. I think I'll get questions at the end, as Ian already mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve Mlenga, for that insightful discussion on equipment management and maintenance, which is very essential in the lab. As we go to the next session, I'll kindly ask Dr. Bettina Chalem-Tsau to share a screen. She is going to share on a naturally important issue after talking about the equipment. We need to acquire this equipment. So she's going to talk about the tendering process to procure laboratory equipment. Dr. Bettina Chalem-Tsau is a senior lecturer and chemical pathologist in the Department of Chemical Pathology at the University of Pretoria and the National Health Laboratory Services in South Africa. She will share on the tendering process to procure laboratory equipment. Over to you, Dr. Matsau.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to try also probably to show the video. But if my bandwidth struggles, I will shut it as we carry on. I hope you guys don't mind. Now, I really appreciate the introduction, and good morning and good day, good evening, everyone. I just want to, my slide is not moving. Okay, there we go. I just want to first just run the disclaimer to you guys that this discussion is based on a combination of experience and research, therefore represent mostly my own personal views, and this is meant mainly for training purposes only. My talk outline will give you a brief introduction, and I'll go into the process of procurement, describing how it works briefly, and then compare this to procurement. And I'll then run into the detail of how we're going to go about this, giving you the how supply chain management actually works on this, the purpose, committees involved, the components, the documents that are playing in there, as well as the stages themselves. Now let's go. Access to appropriate diagnostics is very central to proper patient management. However, for a lab results that could be useful for those that are looking after these patients, you want these results to be accurate, to be reliable, and to actually be released timely. Therefore, it is very critical that procurement of the laboratory diagnostics is done in such a way that we do not compromise on quality and dependability. Some definitions quickly. Procurement itself is actually a process whereby you first identify the needs and the whole lot of steps that we'll go through, where you actually collecting the bids, you selecting tenders, and eventually getting the contract signed. But we'll go in detail of this. The tendering itself is actually a section of procurement whereby you are actually limited to going out to the external market, whereby you actually now present your specifications. This is mostly done on the internet. Your intention is actually to collect the whoever is wanting to actually participate in the bidding process. You analyze what you've got and you nominate the bid. That is what we refer to as tendering. We're going to go into detail with this. Purchasing is similar to what we do at home, where basically money exchange hands. So this is actually transaction oriented. Now the procurement process, therefore, can be perceived as a structured method or means by which a business or an organization uses to actually obtain the desired results while actually saving costs, with the ultimate purpose of building a relationship with the supplier. So we actually hope to achieve a win-win relationship. The primary objectives of procurement are therefore to ensure that we obtain the right quality in the right quantity at the right place, the right time, and for the right amount, that is the price. Now, if we quickly compare the procurement and purchase, we'll appreciate that procurement is actually a journey whereby, as I've indicated earlier, that you go through a series of steps through our procurement. So it encompasses everything, as I've indicated, and you're actually focusing on quality. So here you're looking at value more than how much. You are aimed at identifying and fulfilling the need that you have set up in the beginning. So you hope to achieve and build long-term relationship with your suppliers. And obviously there'll be bidding processes that's being involved in here, and the supplier will indicate the price, and they cannot later on say, actually, my price is actually this. What they have indicated as what they are going to charge you, that's what they are going to keep. When you look at purchase, you pay for what you get. So this is actually like an event. So it's a single activity. You're looking at how much or what you are paying for. So the cost is actually the main focus here. How much am I expected to pay for this? So it is limited to buying goods. The transaction is actually the main issue here. So paying for what you actually see, similar to buying a pair of shoes or something. So looking at procurement is actually a process. So the steps include first, identifying the need, working on the procurement plan, how you're going to go about it, all the way up to the point where we actually have a successful bidder, and we can actually sign the contract with this person and agree that what we have been promised is actually going to be delivered. Procurement actually have subsections. The procurement can actually be like invitation of tenders, which is what we're going to spend time on. And the reason why procurement is actually in different formats is because it depends on how much it is. For instance, in our organization, any purchase or service required that is more than R1 million is subjected to a tendering process, whereas amount less than R1 million are actually subjected to requests for quotations. And when amounts are actually far smaller, about 200, I think, thousand, you can actually go into direct purchase. Now, tenders themselves can either be a public tenders, we call it an open tender, which is mostly what organizations do. But there are also those that are referred to as direct tenders. These are actually done usually for specialized fields. Now, what we'll be going through now will be the phases of procurement. And I'm going to describe the planning phase, the implementation phase, and monitoring phase. And we will go through these each as we carry on. Now let's start first with the planning phase. This is basically where we actually define the requirement and identify the potential suppliers. But this is actually a network of people are actually working on this, as you will see as the journey unfolds. Let's start with the planning phase. In the planning phase, it's actually the most important step in procurement, because at this point in time, you want to be able to make sure that what you are deciding on is actually achieved. So for the success of the procurement resides at this point in time. So the business unit need to be able to first identify the need. In other words, what should be procured and when do we need this? And who should actually be involved in obtaining this? And how are we going to go about procuring? And actually, do we even have money? How much do we have? And while all of this is done, it is then submitted to supply chain management department. Now, during the planning process, what is involved? First of all, you want to have a look at the infrastructure. This Steve also mentioned in detail, so I'll try not to spend too much time on it. The physical structure, like the space where the equipment is going to be, you need the equipment to be at a point where there's actually sufficient room, because you want the equipment to actually be able to, if you want, to breathe. You want to be able, the heat removal to be successful. The people that are going to work at the instrument should be able to move about without any hindrances. And also, if there is need to actually fit some bench next to the equipment, there shouldn't be any issues of being unable. But this is when there is necessary. The windows you don't want any dust particles to come through. So you may have to seal these windows. And you don't want the equipment to be placed where it's actually in direct sunlight, because this could harm the equipment. And is there any air conditioning? The lighting, is it sufficient? Water pressures have to be known upfront. And also power supply, should not be any interruption. We live in South Africa, we know what we're dealing with the power issue right now. Now, performance characteristics are also important. The minimal acceptable performance criteria that you want to consider will be the technical sensitivity, analytical sensitivity, technical specificity, and whether there is going to be issues of having invalid or non-reportable results, and how frequent would this be, how much of these can we accept. All of these were indicated earlier by the earlier speaker. Other issues you want to think about when you're planning is the operational characteristics, like the flow system. Manufacturers that use flow system, actually all they're saying to you is that use our own reagents. Now, the advantage of the flow system is that you know that accuracy and the reproducibility is almost guaranteed, because you're going to have fewer errors, because these have already been tested. However, the biggest issue you may have here will be the cost. They tend to be very expensive. And also, you might even have stock issues. The open system, on the other hand, here, the manufacturer will say, actually, you can use any third parties. Now, the advantage here, which is actually huge, is that because you can use any other reagents, you don't really have stock issues. However, the disadvantage will include quality will probably may be compromised. And the reason being that if you are using multiple suppliers, you could actually have situations
Hello, we seem to have lost Bettina.
Yes, we can't hear her. Yes, we have lost Bettina.
Hold on a moment whilst I try to find what's happening.
Okay, it's fine.
Doctor is nowhere to be heard, please.
All right. We will give him a few seconds. If she's not able to come through, we will ask Prof. Andy Baklo to come forward. Then Bettina will finish a slide session. That's the challenges with the internet. Once in a while, we do face those challenges, but it's work in progress. We do hope as we continue using internet as ways of communicating, those involved in IT will continue improving the connectivity. Also, just to alert colleagues to say that if we have questions, please type them on the chat room. We'll be able to address them at the end, and there will be time for questions, and so that we can have the questions during the round table discussion. And you find that these topics are so intertwined, so it's good that we have the questions at the end, which allows us to benefit from all the speakers from chipping in onto an area where we need a discussion on. So please do type in your questions. We look forward to seeing your questions and addressing them and let's utilize this opportunity that we have all the expertise in the room, and we learn or share the experience to help improve the laboratory practice. We are just giving Bettina a few moments. She's joining in. If we go beyond a minute, we'll allow Prof. Backlot to go earlier than, and then she will finish the slide, the talk later on.
Hi, you want me to carry on from here?
Yes, do carry on.
I'm really sorry
about that.
I'm going
Technology does let us down now and then. Whilst you are catching your breath, we will have questions at the end for all the presenters, and it's all right. You can continue from where you stopped. It's all right.
That's fine.
Thank you very much. All right.
Thanks, Ian. I'm just going to leave the video shut because I've seen now the internet is unstable on my side now. I was just referring when we parted, the open system will therefore be whereby the manufacturer actually is saying you can use anyone. However, there are situations when the manufacturer may actually say to you that it's fine, you can use anyone, but there'll be a clause that says you can use anyone provided it's actually these people. So that is actually very important to be able to note. Then I think also I mentioned the throughput and sample volumes, of, especially when you've got PITS community, and reagent shelf life is also very important because you don't want reagents that are going to be depleted quickly. Did I jump anything? Let's see. Okay. Now let's talk about the regulatory approvals. When it comes to procuring equipment or service for any organization, there are regulations in place. Most countries, including ours, our suppliers are predominantly international suppliers. Now, you would prefer that the supplier should actually be already approved by the country of origin. And you prefer that this supplier should ideally be approved not just for export, but should also be approved for sale and use even in their home country. In that way, you know that this supplier has actually undergone a rigorous process. For instance, you may actually request a proof of registration with a body. For instance, the FDA approved, this is what we do within national health. When we actually are seeking to approve for the equipment, most countries also require that there should actually be proof of registration. In our country, there isn't a supplier that is actually expected to provide any service unless they appear on the National Treasurer database. And that is the case also with NHLS. Slides are not moving nicely. Okay, let's see. The next one is the guided policy frameworks. I just wanted to mention also that for the procurement to actually be done, we are guided by the policies. This is mostly the function of supply chain management, but obviously when we are acquiring an equipment, even us here at the level where we are, we need to participate in drawing the specification so we can actually be able to assist the supply chain management. So when they send out the information regarding the bid, they are sending specific information that we have provided them with. This legislation includes the Public Finance Management Act, the Provincial Procurement Policy Framework Act. This is actually going to guide them in their scoring system. The Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act, this was actually recently introduced in 2003 in our country. And we also have our own in-house policy, the National Health Laboratory Service Act. But these are not the only policies that are actually used when procuring equipment or service. There are many others. And the next phase I would like us to talk about is implementation. When the procuring process occurs, there are committees that are playing a role. These include the bid specification committee, whose primary role is to actually develop or prepare the specifications. The bid specification committee does not actually have a right to appoint any bid. They just draw the specifications. The bid evaluation committee is another team whose responsibility is to go through the specifications drawn by the bid specification committee. Now, in some cases, there can be some members who are in the bid evaluation committee who were actually part of the bid specification committee. Obviously, this is not ideal because you want to remove as much bias as possible. Another committee that is very important in this procurement process is the bid education committee. What this committee does, it goes through the evaluation that was done by the bid evaluation committee, because what the other committee would have done was to have gone through the bids to actually see who is the most likely or the one that is actually scoring high. And taking this information, providing the recommendation to the bid education committee, who therefore have a right to accept, to reject, or even to cancel, or may even suggest a re-advertisement altogether. We're going to go through some of these. I don't know what's going on. My slides are jumping. These committees usually meet in person, but due to our current circumstances, the committees do not have the liberty to meet in person, so most meetings are actually held virtually. The bid specification committee would have been decided upon who participate as a result of the head of department, and the end user can be the laboratory manager, who probably will recommend who can participate. Preferably, there should be not be less than 4 people. The supply chain management practitioner ideally should be involved in this, because the purpose of this person is to actually chair and give advice to the committee to ensure that the process that is being unfolded in drawing the specification is fair, transparent, and is not ambiguous, and also doesn't tend to favor any supplier. At least 1 or 2 of the persons participating should be from the requesting department. So it can be either the laboratory manager or the supervisor, or ideally also the pathologist should also participate in it. All of these members will receive letters of appointment from the supply chain department. The BSc or bid specification committee members must declare their interest and sign confidentiality agreement. They must also decide on the applicable scoring system, 90 to 10 or 80 to 20. This is basically based on the BBEE. I'll explain later on. And they should also indicate whether there will be a compulsory briefing session. All of these has to be indicated upfront. You don't want to be bidders to actually be surprised later on that there was actually supposed to have been a briefing session. Like I said earlier, they don't have any powers to approve. All they do is to draw the specification. The specification documents are then signed by the head of department and approved by the supply chain management. The this specification that are drawn will actually be, for instance, I just have the examples here just to show you. Can be the mandatory, for instance, and the essential. Now, if we look at the mandatory, we can say, for instance, any bidder that attended the compulsory. So this has to be based on, yes, I did or no. Declaration of interest, yes, they did or they didn't. And proof of central supply database, this would be, for instance, if we are actually, we know that they've actually registered with the treasurer database. And also they need to sign that they actually agree with the NHLS general contract terms and conditions. Any supplier who does not comply with any of these is disqualified at that point in time. In other words, it doesn't go to the next stages. Any supplier who does then goes to the next stage. The next stage would be, this is still administrative. The next stage would be the essential requirements. So for instance, we require that the supplier should have the BBBEE certificate, and also proof of valid tax clearance and audited financial statement. These are very important, but does not necessarily disqualify them at the time. What happens if the supplier does not have these documents? Even if this supplier stands out to become the number one, they will not be awarded the bid unless they prove that. So what would happen when this supplier is actually regarded as the winning bidder, would have to, at the time when the bid closes, to say that, oh, here are the documents that you've required. If they don't have them, this supplier is disqualified. Did I jump too much? I think, yeah. The bids, specification, qualification, or pre-qualification are those that would be the mandatory, that could actually be as a result of needing that the supplier is actually registered with a professional body or has special accreditation. So these also would have to be either the pre-qualification as a result, because it's a yes or no, there must actually be substantial, adequate proof that this was actually done properly, because the answer is either a yes or a no. See if I'm not jumping to the next slide now. Okay, this we did. I don't know what's going on with my slides. I just want to now talk about the technical specifications. The first one will be the mandatory. So similar to what we have said with regard to when you look at the administration. So this is actually the functionality of the equipment itself. So for example, in our case, we would like to have an equipment that has got the integrated chemistry and immunology assay. But you also would like to have a standalone ability. In other words, if the one component doesn't work, it should not actually interfere with the other. So if we have a problem with on the chemistry side, immunology should still be working. If the supplier doesn't have that, that is a problem. And also a registration with database, as I've indicated, and you prefer that this product was previously evaluated within the organization, our HTA, so that we know that this equipment actually has been proven to be fit for purpose. And you also need to have an equipment that is compatible and interfaceable with our laboratory information system and capability to run low volumes, particularly the pediatric samples. Any supplier that does not qualify on any of these mandatory will therefore will be disqualified completely, won't be able to go to the next step. See, yeah, this is great. Now, the next step are the non-mandatory, meaning that these do not necessarily disqualify the supplier, but will obviously lose points. So, for example, we may have the supplier that we would like to have should initiate of the online maintenance video, and also we can probably say would like automatically extraction of the monthly QC stats. That would be nice to actually have them generated automatically instead of us drawing them ourselves. Ability of unrestricted software upgrades as the software gets older, and the equipment and reagent upgrades also. And we can also say we would like to have a facility for reagent level tracking, so we can actually see what the level is depleted, the expiry date. We should have alerts coming, availability of remote access troubleshooting. They don't have to physically come here. They can actually help and even be able to see that we are actually struggling and help us without actually coming here. Surge protection and voltage regulation, UPS, also to say, let's say, would like this to kick in within 15 minutes. Now, this would be very nice things to have, and anyone who does have will score points, and anyone who doesn't would definitely lose points, but doesn't necessarily disqualify them. But they are, if they lose more points, naturally they will not going to be successful. See the next slide. The purpose of the bids, the criteria also is to make sure that the evaluation is done such that it is not ambiguous. So the information that is given is quite clear, and it is there is no contradictory clauses in the bidding documents, so no supplier is actually going to be surprised. And also the rationale and the the specification must also be justifiable, because we actually want to base this on what our initial plan really was. And it must also be quantifiable. That is the evaluation. Anything that we cannot quantify should not be included in the evaluation criteria. And how these suppliers are going to be evaluated should actually be given already upfront. So the supplier needs to know upfront how they're actually going to be evaluated. And it should be objective. What this means is that there should not be any written specification that is actually having any specific or particular manufacturer in mind. We should focus on the functional status that we require than to have a specific supplier in mind. Next slide, hopefully it doesn't jump. Tender preparation. Now, once these specifications are being done, the tender is prepared and for advertisement. The purpose of this is to actually have the participants actually saying, yes, I am interested. What's going to happen at this point in time? The bid documents will be advertised, and there will be a little advert that is being prepared. The bid documents will have all the information that is essential, the specification in detail, the technical evaluation, closing date, closing venue, briefing session, if that was actually part of this, and the relevant contact person who's within the supply chain division that they can actually be contacted if they need any further information. The tender advert itself will also be placed on the e-tender portal. Most organizations do it electronically today. It can even be placed on the organization's website. However, it can also be placed in the mainstream media tender bulletin. The advert should be as short as possible, but should contain all the information that is needed. So it must have the bid specification number, the description, and must actually indicate the time. It must actually say how long it is going to be. The minimum duration of the advertisement is usually about 21 days. Okay, I've just said already that we could have either a manual or electronic submission. So the manual, as you guys know, would be more like there'll be a tender box at some place, and the people, when they bring the tenders, they will register for the tender, submit the documents and sign a little register. And eventually on the closing date, this box will be removed. Electronic submission, basically, they will be uploading the, obviously register, have a password, register the submission, and on the closing date, the site is not going to be accessible. Now, on the closing date, once the closing date has been passed, no bidder is allowed to alter any submission that you've been given. And it is ideal that when the bids are being opened, everyone is present, that all the bidders are present. Obviously, it is not always practical. Late bids, obviously, will not be allowed to participate. Once the closing date is done, it is done. And then next slide. My slides freezes, I don't know why. Okay, the bid evaluation committee. This would be the next team that, following the specification being done, these are now looking at the received bids that the bidders have actually submitted. This group of people should be at least no less than 4 people, but they should include a person who's got expertise in quality assurance, legal expertise, and financial person as well. These guys also sign the declaration of interest, as well as undertaking confidentiality clause. These guys should not share what they've discussed with anyone else outside this committee that they belong to. Now, there will be also here a person from the supply chain management whose main purpose here actually is to act on an advisory capacity. And the evaluation method will be looking at the administrative responsiveness, those that I've discussed, and whether there'll be pre-qualification that was needed, and they'll look also at the mandatory documents, those that were actually were required at the time, and they will also look at the pricing schedule and the technical submission. So if any mandatory returnable documents are not provided upfront, the bid is regarded as non-responsive, as I have said earlier. And the essential returnable documents, what would happen here is that if the supplier who's been scoring reasonably well and is at the point where they look like they're going to be the winning bidder, but they have not submitted any essential documents, that is, for example, if they haven't submitted the tax clearance certificate, these people will need to submit prior to the bid being awarded, because we are not able to provide the bidder, even if it appears to be winning, if this did not happen. We have a clause or a rule in South Africa, the legal policy preferential procurement regulations, that actually requires that any person who is not, whose tax are not in order with the SARS may not actually be offered any business. So if they are not able to provide, for example, this particular document, they will not be able to acquire the bid. My slides are making me anxious because they keep jumping for some reason. Let's see. Okay, the tender evaluation, once that has been done, they will package this nicely and they will give it to the bid adjudication committee. There, I just want to say that they will obviously have included issues about the budget and how it was advertised. So in the preparation of the report they are giving to the bid adjudication committee, they should include all of this information. So they should actually be able to indicate what was the score for each of these and what was their reason to exclude others and who actually qualified, and giving the reasons in detail for this. And all of these are therefore submitted to the bid adjudication committee. The bid adjudication committee itself usually comprised of 6 members. These guys are appointed by the CEO of an organization. Again, here you want people who really understand the supply chain management process. They need to understand the policies of the organization, the guide and the practices of the organization. You obviously will need to have a person who's got legal knowledge as well. So mostly these people would include an area manager, pathologist, or a clinician, a quality assurance practitioner would definitely need it in this bid education process. And what these guys do, they will either approve or disapprove of the award of the bid based on the information they are looking at. They may actually even say, sorry, bid evaluation committee, we need more information. How did you come to this point? And they will therefore receive clarity based on that. These members must also declare that they accept the confidentiality of the meeting and not make known anything that is being discussed in this meeting, and not purposely favor or have a prejudice towards anybody who is participating in the meeting. The Bid Education Committee must ensure that all necessary documents have been submitted, and those that have been disqualified are just, and the scoring system has been fair and is actually been consistent throughout, and the calculation was actually done correctly. And the bidders have actually all declared their interest. And evaluation were conducted in accordance with the advertised criteria. Remember, I said to you earlier that all of these have to be advertised. The bidders have to have the information upfront how the evaluation is going to be done. And the process must be free from influence or special interest, and should actually be open and was transparent, so they will be able to assess that when they are doing the adjudication. And they will be able, therefore, to see that indeed this individual does receive the bid, and then it will be awarded to the highest scoring company, basically. The results of adjudication, including the winning bidder and how much the supply is actually charging, should be made available to everyone. In other words, to all participants, including those that did not win at all. Next slide. These guys may actually decide that they actually need to cancel the bid if they feel this is actually not adequate. If the needs, for instance, is not met, the OH has changed. What we actually wanted to achieve, we did not achieve. We could actually even just cancel the bid altogether. If there are any mistakes during the publication process, they may that the specification were actually published with some errors, this will also be cancelled. And if there was no response, no one was actually interested, or the response was received, but it was not adequate, we call this non-responsive, in other words, unsuitable. So therefore, in this case, it will also be cancelled. And if the scoring system was not in keeping, or were incorrect, or were errors in the scoring system, the bid may actually be cancelled. The bid, the contract, once all of this is achieved and the highest bidder is identified, the contract is awarded to the individual, everyone is happy, the people who are receiving the money and those who are getting the equipment are excited. Well, previously people would shake hands, but today, because of COVID, we don't do that anymore. We do lots of things, including elbow touching and whatnot. Now, I just wanted to go to the deviation. If there are sometimes where there will be a deviation from procurement, we call this, for instance, the emergency procurement. For example, if action is needed to be taken urgently, so in that case, you want to avoid harm or danger, so you make a decision quickly, for instance, where we are now in the middle of COVID-19. Or also, when there's a sole source, in other words, there's no competition. So in that way, in that case also, the deviation from the procurement law may actually be undertaken. And also it can be an unsolicited bid where the product offered is of exceptional benefit to the organization. Now we go to the last bit, which is monitoring and evaluation. As I have said to you earlier, the first bit and the last bit of the procurement process are the most important. At this point, we have received the instrument. We want to know if what we have actually received is meeting to what the bidder has actually indicated. So it says a lot about the commitment and the quality of the service we are receiving from the supplier. So we want to know, did we receive what we really ordered? Are the expectations met? Is the quality impressive? And issues of efficiency and performance? And are we receiving support? Because honestly, we will have some problems or issues. And also, apart from even problems, the training itself, is the training that is coming from the supplier really helpful? Because you remember, you want to train staff, not only how to use the equipment, but also how to be able to troubleshoot. You also want them to be able to perform maintenance, especially daily maintenance on the instrument. But we want to see if the supplier is actually very supportive in addressing any queries, any issues that we have. Are they visible? Are they prompt? Are they really coming to the party each time we say we have a problem here? And are they prepared to give us even training whereby there's improvement in service, for instance, or refresher courses, they are available. Some of the things they may actually say, you know what, we were thinking that because now this is what is happening in the with regards to developments, so we're thinking that we can actually train your staff to do it. You want the supplier to actually prove that they want to participate in what we want to call a win-win relationship. and eventually the equipment is going to be disposed. As Steve indicated earlier, that the decommissioning of the instrument is also a big component of the lab, but you want the supplier to actually come to the party with that. Okay, summary and conclusion. As I have indicated earlier, with the planning phase, this is a rigorous, it's a very important step. It's a critical time of the procurement process. This is where you set quality and perfection. And once you have done all of that, you need to be able to see that actually I have achieved the organization goals in terms of what I have got. But you'll only be able to see the value of your planning when you come to the end of the journey. The second phase, the implementation phase, I see this as a takeoff. So this is when you have done your refined selection, you've picked the best, and now you want the best to start performing. Evaluation, that's when you actually now start looking, zooming into the effectiveness of the instrument or the supplier's service is actually monitored, because here you want to actually be able now to win or to really reap the rewards of having picked the best supplier. So you are here now deciding whether this supplier is actually worth to actually be able to use again, because sometimes we find ourselves being able to use the same supplier if we've had a good relationship, or even if someone else elsewhere want to ask about a specific instrument, you're able to say, actually, we have this problem, and they were able to help us. So this is actually when you establish that long-term relationship. This is all I wanted to say, and I just want to thank everyone for listening and to apologize for my jumping slides and for this connectivity during the process, and to thank Prof. Erasmus really for inviting me to come to give this talk. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bettina Chale Matsau, for demystifying the tendering process. As used, this is one area that as a laboratory practitioner, we do face in our life, because equipment that we use in the lab is so costly, and hence in most countries it has to go through the tendering process. And the tendering process is one area for most we have to learn by the school of hard knocks as we undergo this process, because we of lack of knowledge and information. And thank you very much for demystifying this process so that we can best appreciate when we are participating in this process as lab professionals. You can stop your slides share so that Prof. Andy Bucklow can share his slide. Our next presenter is Prof. Andy Bucklow, who is going to present on the 10 steps to achieve a functional laboratory commodities supply chain system. Prof. Andy Bucklow is the Director of Learning and Development at Empower School of Health. Over to you, Prof. Andy Bucklow.
Greetings to all, and I'll try and go quite quickly because we're running a little bit late today. So 10 factors around laboratory supply chain.
Take your time, it's all right.
Okay. All right, so I'm just having a little trouble to get the slides to move today. It's like we're all having this problem today. Okay, here we go. We're all having this problem of jumping slides today. Okay, before I start, just an acknowledgement. Most of the materials in this presentation are taken from the handbooks and guidelines developed by the USAID Deliver project. Links are on the screen to the URLs to access those. There are excellent guides and handbooks and manuals available for all clinical laboratory supply chain management. Well, I suppose the first question is, why is medical laboratory supply chain so difficult? Why is it so much of a problem to us? And one of the reasons is the sheer volume of commodities involved. If we look at pharmacy, A typical essential medicines list for a country is around 350 items. For laboratory, typically we'll have between 1,000 and 3,000 items. And many of those items are equipment specific. They're linked to a particular manufacturer. Unlike medical commodities like dressings or sutures, they can come from an exceedingly wide range of manufacturers. They're not equipment specific. The commodities we have are in an exceedingly wide range of formulations, from dry powders, liquids, and kits. We've got bulk chemicals, we have corrosive, we have hazardous chemicals. Some are very short shelf life. We don't have that with the pharmacy items. They're typically 3-year shelf lives. Some of our control reagents are 30 or 90-day shelf lives. So we have particular problems around the laboratory supply chain that we don't have around other health products. And that's a major difference. And it means the way we approach and undertake supply chain management for laboratory is fundamentally different than for other health products. So how can we get this supply chain to work for medical laboratories? Firstly is to recognize there's a cost. For procurement and supply chain management, for laboratory commodities, it's between 5 and 10% of the procurement value of the commodity. That's not the equipment value, that's capital costs outside. 5 to 10%, it depends on the nature of the country, how many rural laboratories you have, how many central laboratories you have, but in that range, 5 to 10%. It's not free. It doesn't work for nothing. There's a real cost. And too often we have no budget for supply chain. Somehow laboratory staff are supposed to do it in their ordinary time as part of their normal functions. That's not really achievable. If it ever was, it certainly isn't now. Recognize the sheer range of commodities we have to handle. And that means that nobody knows every commodity. We need a range of experts to consult around different commodities. Then there's a 10-step process, which is delineated in the manuals of how to make supply chain management work. And I'll go through trying to describe those 10 steps very briefly now. The first one is standardization. And by that, we mean equipment. It's almost impossible to manage commodities if we've got 4 different manufacturers of CD4 counting equipment. We need different reagents, different materials linked to the manufacturer for that particular equipment. We have to have a standardization program. But even on items like rapid test kits, we have to have a standardization program because we need controls and quality assurance around the results we're getting as well. We have to standardize across the whole of the commodity range. If we don't do that, it's simply not workable in the majority of countries, even in the high-income countries. USA, Europe, they too have quite strict standardization programs in the public sector. We have to bring that in. And that's a problem because a lot of our equipment comes from donors. And donors want to give us what they want and not necessarily what we want. And that means learning to manage donors, having a clear standardization policy and enforcing it. And that can be difficult. It's hard to say no to a donor, but we often have to, and we have to learn how more often, I believe. Product selection. And that might sound a little strange, but too often we're selecting products that we just cannot maintain in the supply chain. We have very limited cold chain, and yet we keep buying products that need cold chain. We have to consider the realities of the resources we have available and buy commodities which we can maintain. And that sometimes might mean buying a test kit which doesn't require refrigeration. Maybe it's not the ideal test kit, but it's one that we can maintain, it's one that we can make work. We need much better selection of the commodities that we're undertaking, especially in this time of COVID, when we're in a short supply situation. Bottom right of the screen is the latest indication of which laboratory commodities are in short supply. Culture media especially is in short supply at present. How can we maintain systems? How can we do it without good standardization and without good consideration of which products to select? Be prepared for regular changes. We can't hold 2 years stock of items of COVID test kits, which are changing regularly. We need to have space for innovation, and that means careful on product selection, being aware of technological developments which might change the nature of the products in the near future. Quantification. How do I know how much to order? Well, there are lots of algorithms available to assist laboratory commodities. Particularly in the news at present is, of course, COVID testing kits. There is the essential forecasting tool from WHO, which has the algorithms built in. How many test kits to order, what reagents to order, how much equipment you need. Yes, PCR test. Which particular PCR equipment do you need? It's all contained there with specifications in the essential forecasting tool. Similar tools available for TB, for malaria commodities, across the board. Information is there, it's not being used. Too often on quantification and forecasting, we're doing it, what did we use last year? And we'll order a bit more this year. We need to get better at that. We can't just keep taking what we did last year. We need to have a rational base, especially in the future, as we have to compete for funding. We have to be able to prove that we need the funding and this level of commodities. And that means having clear guidelines which are internationally accepted. WHO has produced many, each of the organizations like Stop TB has produced them. We need to be using them a lot more. The link to the essential forecasting tool for COVID is on the screen. Logistics management information system. We spend a lot of time doing that for warehouses, but somehow we never get round to it for the laboratory. We have Excel sheets that we use, individual laboratories, sometimes 12-column manual pads. We need to have a full LMIS system. Two problems. Many of the systems are not commodity systems. They were designed as financial control systems. Excellent for libraries, not much use for laboratory commodities. They don't have key functions like expiry date. We need full LMIS for laboratories. Good software, good systems are available. We need to be implementing it, and that's part of my 5 to 10% cost of supply chain management operations. Again, there's special material available for COVID commodities because they are rather special at present and rapidly changing. Inventory management, how much do you have in stock? Well, normally we can find some figures for the central laboratory. What's in stock at the district hospital laboratories? We don't know. We have to have proper inventory management systems. Some of the smallest shops we go into have got barcode scanning. How many of our inventory systems have even got barcode scanning so that we don't have to do manual counts all the time of what the stock levels are? We need to introduce this kind of technology. It's long past time, it's cost effective, it brings results. It reduces expiry rates, and on that level alone, it's cost effective, but it brings many benefits across. Realistic inventory management. Storage and distribution, very sad. WHO has developed good storage practice and good distribution practice. I doubt that even 10% of countries qualify for either. I doubt that 30% of countries even know what the regulations are. We're using trucks and transport to distribute our commodities, which are just not appropriate. We have to up the game and move to good storage and good distribution practice. They are cost effective, they save money. It's a simple guide. Temperature. We have a problem with storage temperature across many of our countries during the summer months. As a crude guide, for every 10 degrees centigrade rise, the rate of deterioration doubles. What does that mean? If it's a 2-year shelf life and I'm storing it at 35 centigrade, it's probably now only a 1-year shelf life because the product is deteriorating. And yet our rapid test kits going out to rural clinics, are we really managing those so that we've got temperature control? We have to bring better temperature control and better storage and distribution, recognizing good storage practice, good distribution practice, solid guidelines, all information is there. We need to get into implementing it. Quality assurance and quality controls. Quality assurance, our commodities. Every time we deliver pharmaceuticals, we take some samples for analysis. We don't regularly do that so much with laboratory commodities. Are we sending some rapid test kits for testing? Well, if it's a global fund grant, you don't have a choice. You have to send some. We shouldn't wait for the donors to be forcing us to undertake quality assurance. It should be part of our regular function. Does this item meet specification? It doesn't always need separate, detailed commodity testing laboratories to do it. There are simple techniques that we can use, visual inspections, other simple techniques to prove that they meet specification. Relatively easily done, and that's within the 5 to 10% for supply chain. We don't need a massive amount of extra funding to do quality assurance of our laboratory commodities. Staffing and management, the main problem is staff training. Laboratory technicians, laboratory staff rarely get trained in supply chain management, and nobody trains supply chain management people in laboratory. We have to have the crossover between the two. You don't need to be a full laboratory technologist to be able to do supply chain, but you do need supply chain training to do supply chain. Lots of good training available. There's online training available for different laboratory staff and different people. Lots of good guidelines available for training. We need to recognize it's not a job that we do 5% of the time when we don't want to do something else. It's a real job, a real function, must be taken seriously, be budgeted, and trained staff to do it. Policy and regulatory, yes. We need clear policies for our commodities, for our commodity procurement and the whole of the supply chain, and the regulatory environment. Which test kits, which commodities, which materials are we going to have on regulatory control? Often there's very little regulatory control. There are excellent WHO model policies. I don't have to sit down and write them all from the beginning. Model policies exist, which we can implement quite quickly on equipment and on diagnostics. Long past time, we should be implementing. Financing, I mentioned 5 to 10%, and that means lobbying. In order to lobby for financing for supply chain management of laboratory commodities, I have to have a clear case. And that means having trained staff who can advocate, who can put forward evidence-based arguments of what I want to do, why it's cost effective, and why we need the funding. Those are the 10 steps. Finally, for those interested in COVID, there is a whole series of courses on commodity management for COVID commodities, which includes laboratory and diagnostic items. The link to that course, it's free, it's available through UN on the screen. It was originally written by Empower School of Health. Okay, I'm over time, so I'll stop now and pass back to Ian.
Thank you very much, Prof. Andy Bucklow, for such an insightful presentation on laboratory commodity supply chain system. We in the lab as professionals, we face this need to manage the reagents, the consumables that we deal with day in, day out, and hence we have to manage our commodities well in order to be effective and to be profitable. And we have come to the end of our presentations. Now is the time whereby we'll go to the roundtable discussion. We'll deal with questions that are in the chat box first, then we can go to those who would want to speak live. So I will first go to the chat box and read the questions that we got via the chat chart system. All right, I'm just going to the questions on the chat box. All right. The first one that I can see is, can a stock manager or a store officer involve in procurement? I would ask the panelists to mute and indicate and respond to the raised question as well. Anyone from the panelists who would want to go first on this question?
Okay, I think Bettina is probably better placed to answer it, but I'll perhaps start. The answer is yes, but. Procurement is a wide area. There's lots of functions within procurement. Those functions are separated in order to reduce potential for influence. So yes, they can be involved in some procurement functions, not all. Depends on the exact nature.
All right. Anyone wants and want to add anything to that?
Yes, I will. And I just also want to say that, remember that procurement is actually, it involves multiple people. It is not one set of expertise. Now, the stock manager will probably be participating, but it will be a tiny role that they're going to do. Now, I want to tell you how this is actually done. This is from Ario. Now, you have the supply management division that is actually going out to request for the tenders, right? The bids, basically. Now, the earliest phases would be first us on the ground digging and trying to find what will be the best functioning equipment, if we're looking for equipment for us to be able to procure, to have, right? Now, this information will therefore be submitted to the supply chain management. Now, the stock manager would probably play a tiny role in terms of acquiring the equipment or the service, because their role is most of the time to actually be able to ascertain what's there. So they most of the time are actually a small component of procurement. Remember, each organization will have the supply chain management, will have the demand section, demand management, and will have the procurement. And we'll also have another section, which is our HTA. This is actually involved. We didn't touch too much on that on this presentation, because we decided to actually focus on acquisition and management of equipment. But no equipment is going to be really regarded as fully functional until it's fully validated. But all of these people, including the stock manager, will play some role of one sort or the other. Me as a pathologist, my primary role will be to develop to assist in developing these specifications, because you need people with technical expertise to be able to try to bring information regarding how this is going to work. Now, we don't go out there. I don't know if I'm beyond answering your question, but we don't go out there and do market research. This is the core function of supply management. Ario, if I'm answering your question satisfactorily. So yes, it will be necessary, but they will play a minor role, because you need diverse expertise for procurement. Ian, we want to go to the next question.
I wanted to check if there is anyone among the panelists who would want to say something before we go to the next question. And,
okay.
And just wanted to comment also, it depends with the nature of the operation. If you are a small entity, you just, sometimes you find as the laboratory personnel, you just have to do everything on your own. But as you have a bigger organization, it involves more people and specialized colleagues who can help in various aspects of the procurement. The next question is, what sort of criterion would you say to be quantifiable? I'm sure this person is referring to one of the specification on tendering process, I think.
Yeah, evaluation.
Yes.
Let me just give you an example. So when we actually scoring the bidders, you will have each of the entities having a value. Let's say you want your the scoring that you're interested in, that what we included will be, you would like to have the electronic QCs and a calibrator or agent number tracking system for this. Each of these suppliers should actually be able to provide with that. Now, if you have provided the scoring of 1, whoever has that, then you'll give 1. Whoever does not have that doesn't get any, does not get anything. Another example would be if you want, for example, to have integrated PC, barcode reader, having a printer and UPS. If all of these, and the scoring, let's say you've given it a score of 2, because remember, this is done upfront. So now you are now scoring them based on the criterion you have set. So you have decided on the score of 2. Therefore, when you score these people, you will decide that if I need all of these are essential, then I will give this the bidder the score of 2. If you decide that I really need to have a printer, all of these are important, I need to have a printer, but printer is really not essential. So if any one of these people does not really have a printer, won't get a 2, but I think I can give them a 1. But because it's a committee, the committee decide on how to score each of these bidders. I hope that answers your question. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you. This was specific to equipment valid to the tendering process, so I won't put it to the colleagues. I'll go to the next one, which asks on shed more light on equipment decommissioning, and it's also asking for us to include the donated ones on decommissioning. Any one of the colleagues can go first. We are welcome to unmute and go. Steve?
I just wanted to say that, okay, I was hoping Steve would answer that, but I just wanted to say that at this point in time, most of the equipments, we actually prefer to have it as a rented equipment, I might put it that way, rather than a purchase. So usually an equipment that is actually a lease is easier when it comes to decommissioning, because at the lifespan of the equipment that is lived, therefore, it's expected of the suppliers to actually remove it. The issues that I have seen becomes when the laboratory has actually chosen to actually purchase an equipment, because then that becomes a problem, because how do you get rid of this equipment? I don't know if Steve want to add any further information.
All right. And I just, whilst waiting for another of the presenters to come in, I would say it's whereby we have outright purchase of equipment in the lab. And we find that as years go by, sometimes the equipment can be overtaken by events, by technology, or it becomes more expensive to maintain. There is need of decommissioning of the equipment. And in the lab, it's good to have a system in place whereby you say, what criteria are we using to say, this one, we are putting it to rest, so that we can go on to the next technology, and also the criteria of where we will then be able to place this equipment, including even the donated equipment. We should be able also to say if the equipment no longer is fit for purpose, we can always have utilizing the criteria and be able to have an objective way of decommissioning the equipment. Any of the colleagues who want to comment something on that one before we go to the last?
Okay, the point around donated equipment is the ownership transfers to the country after arrival in country. It no longer belongs to the donor. Doesn't matter which of the bilateral or multilateral donors funded it, they don't own it anymore. You as the country own it. So you have the right to dispose of it as you wish. There is a full set of guidelines from WHO on decommissioning equipment and how to make the decision when to dispose of it and how to dispose of it safely. Part of those guidelines require that in future, in procurement, we consider the ramification of disposal of the equipment. For most of equipment, it will be quite straightforward. But for example, equipment containing mercury or other toxic materials would require special disposal. So increasingly, as Bettina has said, leasing equipment becomes a much better option because then you don't get in to the technology of waste disposal of laboratory equipment, which can be quite challenging. But there are guidelines available from WHO on the whole decommissioning process, how to go about it, and the waste management.
Thank you very much. Steve, do you want to comment something? All right. Our last question would be from Felix Nyakwawa. Then we close the session. Can you unmute your mic?
Thanks for recognizing me. Yes, I'm Felix Nyakwawa from Malawi.
You had raised your hand. That's why I said you had the last question.
Yes. I wanted to make sure that I'm being heard there. Thanks. Yeah. So I have a Bachelor of Science in Medical Laboratory, and as well also have a professional diploma in procurement and supply chain. I really thanks for this meeting. I found this meeting very important and educative to me. Just one or two observations that I wanted just to point out. One issue I want to agree with Prof. And the other presenters. What we need from my observation is advocating for policy, advocating for the policy to make sure that the laboratory supply chain really stand out. Why am I saying this? If we go and you check in terms of the budget for laboratory, almost over 70% goes to is to do with reagents, consumables, as well as equipment. So if you take about that 80% in terms of the wastage that is created if the issues of laboratory supply chain is not taken care of or is not given an attention, we end up into, according to literature, about 25 to 30% of the waste that is created due to overstocking, issues to do with expiries and what have you, even including reverse logistics. So now if you look at that and thinking of how much in terms of the contribution in the HR, we still feel like, I still feel like we just need a bit of pressing a button to make sure that there is skilled people to make sure that they are able to manage supply chain issues. So that's one observation. Second, on the same is, I think that was already pointed out to say, yes, stores officer can take part as what has been highlighted. But I wanted to make it clear that the stores officer cannot procure, because you can't procure, you can't keep. It, in terms of risk, is just high risk. Those are just few things that I wanted to point out. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have come to the end of our webinar. We just want to ask if there is any parting shots from the colleagues who are in the panel before I close. Anyone who has anything they want to say from the panel before I close?
Hello. Hello.
Oh, all right. Oh, there's someone who is muted. Oh, Pierre. All right. You wanted to say something? You can say.
My name is Pierre Claver from Burundi.
Yes.
And I participated to this webinar. Action of logistician for public health in Burundi. If we would like to organize this webinar in Burundi, how can we proceed?
Pierre, it's good that we can organize and it like this, whereby we have international panelists and we can share experience, but you can also get in touch with if you want something specific for your country, we can get in touch. I will share with you my email, and we can link with the other colleagues, and we can hold something specific for your country if there is need for such, because the whole point is to help strengthen the labs. So we are open to be able to find ways of strengthening all the labs in the countries that are involved. Thank you very much for showing interest.
Yes, if you, I don't know if you have my email.
All right, we'll get your contact, and we'll share with you. We'll communicate with you via the email that you used on register.
Let's write in the chat my email.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. Any parting shots from the panelists before I close? From the presenters?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I just
Sorry. Sorry.
All right. Can you kindly mute that? All right.
Sorry.
All right. You can go ahead, Bettina.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this is a very good platform, and I think it actually gives opportunity for us to come together and share ideas on this except that we sometimes have technical glitches like we did now, but I really think this is a very good idea. And I agree with you and Steve earlier when you mentioned that this is one moment that we should actually cherish, of being able to come together and share information. Thanks for your time.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. We look forward to many more.
Sorry.
Okay. I'm left, but with saying thank you very much all for.
I have a question, please.
Oh, all right. All right. We can hear you. All right. Let's hear you before we close. All right.
I have a question, please.
All right. We can hear you. Let's hear you. Say it. All right.
Okay. My name is Felix Chimpaye. from Burundi. I would like to ask you, if you organize this kind of meeting, it's better to do this meeting for 2 days or 3 days, because this subject is very, very nice. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that compliment. And I think it ends on a good note that we are being complimented for our for the effort of the presenter. And I would want to thank all the presenters for their hard work in putting together these presentations. And it's part of the initiative whereby the African universities that have come together in collaboration with the African Federation of Clinical Chemistry and Laboratory Medicine and Empower School of Health is doing to strengthen labs in Africa. And it's actually the fourth one in the series, and there are more to come. So you look out, watch the space. We'll be sending another invite for another webinar we intend to do, and the next one in November on lab management. I would want to thank you all for taking your time to be part of this webinar, and would want to thank all of you and the presenters. We have come to the end of the program so that we can allow colleagues to move on with the day. Thank you very much, and let's have a good day, and look forward to seeing you in the next webinar in November. Thank you very much.
Thank you also.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We are happy with this webinar. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.